The space around Kepler 442 was quiet. Too quiet for Admiral Vextar Zeal's liking. He stood on the bridge of his massive warship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the viewing screen with growing interest. 5 small ships floated in the distance. They looked harmless enough. Commander Kurth, what do our sensors tell us about these vessels? Admiral Zul asked his second-in-command. Commander Kurth Newell looked at his datapad and frowned. They appear to be exploration ships, Admiral. Basic. Shields, simple weapons, chemical propulsion systems. Nothing that should concern our fleet. Admiral Zal smiled, showing his sharp teeth. The Zarathian Empire had conquered 12 different species across 3 star systems. These humans would make number 13. How many ships do they have? 5. Ships total, sir. Our fleet has 27 warships. The odds are clearly in our favor. The Admiral nodded. This would be easy. Too easy, perhaps, but the Empire needed new territories and new slaves. These humans had chosen the wrong system to explore. Open a communication channel to their lead ship, Admiral Z ordered, on the human ship Liberty. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair. He was a calm man with graying hair and steady eyes. Around him, his crew worked quietly at their stations. The bridge looked simple and clean, nothing like the powerful warships of Earth's true fleet. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the alien flagship, said Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park, the ship's tactical officer. She was young but smart, with dark hair tied back in a neat ponytail. Put it on screen, Lisa, Captain Morrison sighed. The viewing screen flickered, and a large alien face appeared. Admiral Zal had blue-gray skin, yellow eyes, and a mouth full of sharp teeth. He wore a military uniform covered in medals and decorations. I am Admiral Vextar Zal of the Zarathian Galactic Empire, the alien said through the universal translator. His voice was deep and threatening. You have entered Imperial space without permission. This is a crime punishable by death or slavery. Captain Morrison remained calm. He had expected this. I am Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Liberty. We are on a peaceful exploration mission. We mean no harm to your empire. Admiral Zal laughed, a harsh sound that made the bridge crew uncomfortable. Peaceful? How amusing. Your species is unknown to us, which means you are weak and primitive. I will give you one chance to surrender. What are your terms? Captain Morrison asked, though he already knew what the answer would be. Complete surrender of all 5 ships and their crews. You will turn over all your technology and knowledge to the Empire. Your people will serve as workers in our factories and mines. Those who resist will be executed. Captain Morrison looked around his bridge. His crew showed no fear, only quiet confidence. They had trained for this moment for years. That's quite an offer, Admiral, Captain Morrison said politely. However, I'll need to discuss this with my fellow captains before giving you an answer. Admiral Zal's eyes narrowed. You dare to negotiate with the Zarathian Empire? Very well. You have 30 minutes to decide. After that, we will destroy your ships and take what we want from the wreckage. The transmission ended, and the alien face disappeared from the screen. Well, that went about as expected, said Chief Engineer Paul Anderson from his station. He was a stocky man with kind eyes and steady hands. Should I begin charging thee? Real weapon systems? Not yet, Paul, Captain Morrison said. Let's stick to the plan. Lisa, open a secure channel to the other captains. 4 faces appeared on smaller screens around the bridge. Captain Ben Hayes of the Constitution looked serious and ready. Captain Amy Foster of the Yorktown seemed relaxed, almost bored. Captain Ryan Cooper of the Intrepid was checking something on his tablet. Captain Nina Torres of the Defiance was smiling slightly. Everyone heard that conversation, I assume? Captain Morrison asked. Hard to miss, Captain Hayes replied. Standard Empire behavior. Demand surrender, threaten destruction, claim everything for themselves. The question is, are we ready to drop the act? Captain Foster asked. My crew is getting tired of pretending to be helpless scientists. Captain Morrison nodded. Our long-range sensors show they have exactly the fleet composition we expected. 27 ships, all using standard Zarathian technology. Nothing we haven't seen before. My engineering team has been monitoring their communications, Captain Cooper added. They're using basic encryption. We've been reading their messages for the past hour. Captain Torres leaned forward. They're planning to disable our engines first, then board our ships. Very predictable. Any signs they suspect what we really are? Captain Morrison asked. None at all, Captain Hayes said. Their sensors are showing them exactly what we want them to see. 5 harmless exploration ships with basic defenses. Lieutenant Commander Steve Walsh, the Liberty's weapons officer, looked up from his station. Captain, the fake weapon signatures are holding steady. They think our main guns are simple plasma cannons. Good work, Steve, Captain Morrison said. How much time do we have left on their deadline? 22 minutes, sir, Communications Officer Lieutenant Susan Clark replied. She was monitoring all the alien communications channels. Plenty of time, Captain Morrison said. Are all ships ready for the reveal? Each captain nodded in turn. They had practiced this scenario dozens of times in simulations. The first contact with an aggressive alien empire was always dangerous, but humanity had prepared well. Remember, everyone, Captain Morrison said seriously, we're not here to start a war. We're here to prevent one. These Zarathians need to understand humanity is not easy prey. What if they don't listen? Captain Torres asked. Then we'll have to be more convincing, Captain Morrison replied. But let's hope it doesn't come. To that ... Dr. Helen Martinez, the fleet's diplomatic advisor, spoke up from her station. Captain, I've been studying their body language and speech patterns. This Admiral Zal is typical of Zarathian military leaders. Aggressive, proud, but not stupid. If we show him the truth about our capabilities, he might be reasonable. That's what we're counting on, Helen, Captain Morrison said. All right, everyone, take your positions. In 20 minutes, the Zarathian Empire is going to learn something new about humanity. The 5 ships floated quietly in space, looking harmless and defenseless, but appearances could be deceiving. Very deceiving indeed. The secure communication channel between the 5 human ships buzzed with quiet activity. Captain Morrison looked at the faces of his fellow captains on the smaller screens. Each one commanded a ship that looked like a simple exploration vessel. From the outside, the truth was very different. Status report from each ship, Captain Morrison said calmly. Ben, how's the Constitution? Captain Ben Hayes checked his displays. All systems green, Jake. The fake sensor readings are working perfectly. They think we have basic deflector shields and maybe a few small plasma guns. Amy, what about Yorktown? Morrison asked. Captain Amy Foster smiled. My crew loves this game of pretend. The aliens have no idea we're carrying enough firepower to level a small moon. The nanite warheads are ready for deployment. Captain Ryan Cooper of the Intrepid looked up from his tablet. The gravity manipulation systems are online and ready. I can create space-time distortions on command. The Zarathians have never seen anything like it. Captain Nina Torres of the Defiance stretched in her command chair. The temporal displacement field is charged and stable. We can phase out of normal space-time whenever needed. Their sensors won't even know where we went. Captain Morrison nodded with satisfaction. Excellent. Paul, what's the status of our stealth systems? Chief Engineer Paul Anderson looked up from his console. The holographic projectors are working perfectly, Captain. To their sensors, we look like we have old-style chemical rocket engines and basic power systems. They can't see our real fusion reactors or quantum drives. The deception has been 3 years in the making, said Dr. Helen Martinez, the diplomatic advisor. Ever since we started monitoring Zarathian communications, we knew this day would come. They follow the same pattern with every new species they meet. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park pulled up a tactical display. Their fleet is positioned exactly as our intelligence predicted. The flagship in the center, heavy cruisers forming the main battle line, and smaller ships trying to surround us. They think we're trapped, Captain Morrison observed. Classic Zarathian tactics. Surround the enemy, demand surrender, then destroy them if they refuse. Meanwhile, on the Zarathian flagship Eternal Dominion, Admiral Vextar Zul was growing impatient. He paced back and forth on his bridge, his heavy boots making loud sounds on the metal floor. How much time is left? He demanded. 15 minutes until the deadline, Admiral, replied his tactical officer. Commander Kurf Null was studying the human ships through the long-range sensors. Something felt wrong, but he couldn't identify what it was. Admiral, may I suggest? We scan them more carefully? There's something odd about their energy signatures. Odd how? Admiral Zal stopped pacing and looked at his second in command. I'm not sure, sir. The readings are too clean, too simple. Most primitive species have messy, inefficient power systems. These humans seem almost too basic. Admiral Zul waved his hand dismissively. You're thinking too much, Kurth. Sometimes primitive means primitive. Look at their ships. Small, boxy, ugly. They look like cargo haulers, not warships. Commander Kurth nodded, but he still felt uneasy. In his many years of service, he had learned to trust his instincts. Something about these humans didn't feel right. Back on the Liberty, the crew continued their preparations. Lieutenant Commander Steve Walsh was running final checks on the real weapon systems. The Zarathians thought the human ships carried simple plasma cannons. They had no idea about the particle beam arrays, quantum torpedo launchers, and exotic matter projectors hidden beneath the fake hull plating. All weapon systems show ready, Steve reported quietly. The Zarathians are in for quite a surprise. Communications. Officer Lieutenant Susan Clark was monitoring all the alien channels. Captain, I'm picking up increased chatter from their fleet. They're getting excited about the coming battle. What are they saying? Captain Morrison asked. The usual things, sir. Betting on how quickly they can destroy us. Arguing about who gets to board our ships first. Discussing what kind of slaves we'll make. Captain Morrison's jaw tightened slightly. The Zarathians had enslaved millions of beings across their empire. Today, that would change. Helen, remind me again why we chose this approach instead of showing up with an obvious battle fleet? Dr. Martinez adjusted her glasses. Because, Captain, aggressive species like the Zarathians only understand strength when it's demonstrated, not threatened. If we had arrived with obvious warships, they would have either run away or brought their entire fleet. This way, we can show them exactly what humanity is capable of while controlling the situation. Plus, added Captain Foster from the Yorktown, this is much more fun. I love the look on their faces when they realize they've been fooled. Captain Torres laughed from the defiance. Amy, you have a twisted sense of humor, but I agree. There's something satisfying about outwitting bullies. The minutes ticked by slowly. The Zarathian fleet maintained its positions, confident in their overwhelming advantage. Their weapons were charged and ready. Their boarding parties were prepared. This would be another easy victory for the Empire. On the Liberty, Captain Morrison made one final check with his crew. Everyone ready? Around the bridge, heads nodded. These men and women had trained for years for this moment. They were the best Earth had to offer, and they were about to prove it. "Jake," Captain Hayes called from the Constitution. "My sensors show the Zarathians are getting nervous. Their formation is tightening up. They want to make sure we can't escape," Captain Cooper observed from the Intrepid. Not that these fake engines could outrun them anyway. Captain Morrison looked at the chronometer. 5 minutes left on their deadline. "Final systems check, everyone. All ships report ready," came the replies from his fellow captains. "Stealth systems holding steady," Paul Anderson reported. "Weapon systems armed and ready," Steve Walsh confirmed. "Communications clear on all channels," Susan Clark added. "Diplomatic protocols prepared," Dr. Martinez said. "Tactical analysis complete," Lisa Park finished. Admiral Zool's voice suddenly boomed over the communication system. "Human ships, you have 2 minutes remaining. What is your decision?" Captain Morrison stood up from his command chair. This was the moment everything changed. "Admiral Zoll, we appreciate your generous offer, but we must respectfully decline." There was a moment of stunned silence from the Zarathian flagship. "You refuse?" Admiral Zoll's voice was filled with disbelief. "You dare refuse the Zarathian Empire? We prefer to handle our affairs diplomatically," Captain Morrison replied calmly. "Perhaps we could discuss a peaceful solution that benefits both our species." The alien admiral's laughter was harsh and mocking. "Peaceful solution? You are 5 small ships facing 27 warships of the Empire. You have no weapons that can threaten us, no shields that can protect you, and no speed that can save you. What possible reason do you have to refuse?" Captain Morrison smiled, though the alien couldn't see it. "Admiral, I think you might be surprised by what humanity can do when we put our minds to it. Your time is up, human. Prepare to be destroyed." The communication channel closed with a sharp click. Captain Morrison looked around his bridge one last time. His crew was ready. His ship was ready. Humanity was ready. "All ships, this is Liberty," he said into his communicator. "Drop the disguise. Let's show them who we really are." Admiral Vextar Zool raised his hand high above his head on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. Around him, his crew waited for the order to attack. The human ships floated helplessly in space, completely surrounded by Zarathian warships. "All ships, prepare to fire," the Admiral commanded. "Target their engines first. I want them disabled, not destroyed. We can learn more from intact ships." Commander Kurth Newell felt his uneasiness growing stronger. Something was wrong. The humans were too calm, too confident. But it was too late to voice his concerns now. "Fire." Admiral Zool brought his hand down sharply. 20-7 Zarathian warships opened fire at once. Plasma beams and quantum torpedoes streaked through space toward the 5 human vessels. The combined firepower was enough to destroy a small fleet of regular warships. The aliens expected to see the human ships explode, or at least lose power. Immediately, instead, something impossible happened. The moment the Zarathian weapons fired, the 5 human ships changed completely. The boxy, ugly hulls flickered and disappeared like mirages. In their place appeared sleek, angular warships with smooth metal surfaces that seemed to absorb light. The ships were larger than they had appeared, and their hulls bristled with weapon ports and sensor arrays. "What in the void? Commander Kurth whispered, staring at his tactical display in shock. The incoming Zarathian weapons struck the human ships and simply vanished. Point defense systems had activated so quickly that the alien sensors could barely track them. Hundreds of small energy beams reached out from the human vessels, intercepting every plasma bolt and quantum torpedo with perfect accuracy. On the Liberty, Lieutenant Commander Steve Walsh worked calmly at his weapons console. All incoming fire neutralized. "Captain, point defense grid is operating at 98% efficiency. Excellent work, Steve, Captain Morrison replied. He turned to his communications officer. Susan, open channels to all Zarathian ships. I think it's time for a proper introduction. Captain. Morrison's face appeared on screens throughout the Zarathian fleet. He looked calm and confident, not at all like someone whose ship had just been attacked by overwhelming force. Admiral Zoll, I believe there's been a misunderstanding, Captain Morrison said politely. Allow me to introduce myself properly. I am Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Defense Force, commanding the 5th Fleet's Reconnaissance Division. On the Zarathian flagship, Admiral Zool stared at the human captain in disbelief. Defense Force? Your ships are exploration vessels. I'm afraid not, Admiral. What you saw before were holographic disguises. We've been using them to observe how your empire treats first contact situations. The results have been quite educational. Commander. Kurth Null was frantically checking his sensor readings. Admiral, the energy signatures from their ships. They're completely different now. These readings are off the scale. Impossible, Admiral Zoll growled. No species has technology that advanced. You're bluffing, Captain Morrison smiled. I understand your skepticism, Admiral. Perhaps a small demonstration would be helpful. Constitution, if you would. The second human ship, the Constitution, rotated slowly to face 3 Zarathian cruisers. A single weapon port opened on its hull, and a thin beam of blue light shot out. The beam touched each of the 3 alien ships for just a moment. Immediately, all 3 Zarathian cruisers went dark. Their engines stopped, their weapons powered down, and their lights went out. They were completely disabled, but undamaged. What did you do to them? Admiral Zoll demanded. Captain Ben Hayes answered from the Constitution. Particle beam disruption, Admiral. We temporarily overloaded their main power systems. The crews are unharmed, and the ships can be repaired easily. We could have destroyed them instead, but we prefer not to kill unless absolutely necessary. Admiral Zoll looked around his bridge at his shocked crew. In 30 years of conquest, he had never seen weapons that could disable ships so cleanly and precisely. This is some kind of trick, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. No trick, Admiral, Captain Morrison replied. Just technology you haven't encountered before. Yorktown, would you care to show them the nanic warheads? The 3rd human ship, the Yorktown, launched 5 small projectiles toward different parts of the Zarathian fleet. The projectiles moved slowly, almost casually, giving the alien ships plenty of time to shoot them down. But when the Zarathians fired at them, their weapons simply passed through the projectiles, as if they weren't their dot. Each nanite warhead reached a different Zarathian ship and exploded in a shower of tiny sparkles. The sparkles spread across the alien hulls like glitter. What are those things? Commander Kurth asked nervously. Captain Amy Foster answered from the Yorktown. Nanoscale robots, Commander. They're currently mapping your shield generators and finding the most efficient way to shut them down. Don't worry, they won't hurt your crews. As she spoke, the shields around 5 more Zarathian ships flickered and died. The nanites had found the shield generators and simply turned them off. Admiral Zool was beginning to understand that his fleet was in serious trouble. How is this possible? Our intelligence reports said humans were a primitive species. Your intelligence was deliberately fed false information, Dr. Helen Martinez said, appearing on the screen next to Captain Morrison. We've been monitoring your empire's communications for over a century, Admiral. We know about your conquest of the Eltarians, the enslavement of the Centauri colonies, and the destruction of the vegan homeworld. You've been spying on us? Admiral Zool's voice rose in anger. We've been watching you, Captain Morrison corrected. Humanity learned long ago that knowledge is the best defense. We knew that eventually, our expansion into space would bring use into contact with your empire. We wanted to be ready. Captain Ryan Cooper of the Intrepid spoke up. Admiral, if I may demonstrate our gravity manipulation technology, I promise it won't damage your ships. Before Admiral Zal could respond, the space around 5 Zarathian ships began to shimmer. The ships were pulled out of their formation by invisible forces, moving slowly but irresistibly toward the center of the human fleet. Stop this, Admiral Zal commanded. The ships are perfectly safe, Captain Cooper assured him. We're just showing you that we can move your vessels wherever we want them. The crews inside are experiencing normal gravity. They're not being harmed. The pulled ships came to a gentle stop, now positioned between the human vessels and the rest of the Zarathian fleet. Admiral Zal realized that his own ships were now acting as shields, protecting the humans from his remaining forces. This is impossible, he whispered. Captain Nina Torres of the Defiance laughed softly. You haven't seen anything yet, Admiral. Watch this. The Defiance seemed to flicker and then vanished completely from all sensors. For a moment, there was no trace of the ship anywhere. Then it reappeared directly behind the Eternal Dominion, so close that its hull almost touched the Zarathian. Flagship, temporal displacement field, Captain Torres explained cheerfully. We stepped outside normal space-time for a few seconds. Very handy for getting around enemy fleets. Admiral Zul spun around to stare at the human warship that had somehow appeared behind him. His crew was in a state of panic, unsure how to respond to weapons and technologies they had never imagined. Admiral, Captain Morrison said gently, I think it's time we had a serious conversation about the future of this region of space. Your empire has been the dominant power here for a long time, but that's about to change. Are you threatening us? Admiral Zul asked, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. Not threatening, Admiral. Informing. Humanity's now a galactic power, whether we want it to be or not. The question is whether we're going to be enemies or whether we can find a way to coexist peacefully. Commander Kurth Null leaned close to his admiral and whispered urgently, Sir, recommend we consider their offer. We've lost half our fleet's combat effectiveness, and they've barely tried. If they wanted to destroy us, we'd already be dead. Admiral. Zell looked around at his disabled ships, his confused crew, and the 5 human vessels that had revealed themselves to be far more than they appeared. For the first time in his military career, he was completely outmatched. What do you want from you? He asked quietly. Captain Morrison's expression became serious. We want you to stop, Admiral. Stop the conquests, stop the slavery, stop the destruction. It's time for a new way of doing things in this part of the galaxy. And if we refuse? The 5 human captains looked at each other across their communication screens. Finally, Captain Morrison spoke. Then we'll have to be more persuasive, Admiral. And trust me, you don't want to see what happens when humanity stops being polite. Admiral Vextar Zul stared at the tactical display on his bridge. Half of his mighty fleet was disabled or out of position. The 5 human ships sat calmly in the center of his formation, completely untouchable. His pride as a Zarathian commander warred with his growing fear of these strange beings. Admiral, Commander Kurth Null said quietly, perhaps we should listen to what they have to say. Listen? Admiral Zell's voice was sharp with anger. We are the Zarathian Empire. We do not listen to demands from primitive species. Captain Morrison's voice came through the communication system, calm and patient. Admiral, I understand this is difficult for you. Your empire has been the strongest power in this region for generations. But times change, and you need to change with them. You dare lecture me? Admiral Zal stepped closer to the main screen. You may have strange weapons, but you are still only 5 ships. The Empire has thousands of warships across 3-star systems. Actually, Admiral, we need to discuss that, Captain Morrison replied. Susan, please show the Admiral what we've learned about his empire. Communications Officer Lieutenant Susan Clark transmitted a detailed holographic display that appeared in the center of the Zarathian bridge. Admiral Zool and his crew watched in shock as their entire empire was laid out before them in perfect detail. The display showed every Zarathian world, every military base, every shipyard, and every resource extraction facility. It included precise locations of all Imperial fleets, their ship counts, and their current missions. Even the personal quarters of high-ranking officials were marked on the map. This is impossible, Admiral Zoll whispered. Our security is absolute. No outsider could gather this information. Your security was designed to keep out species with technology similar to your own, Dr. Helen Martinez explained. Human intelligence. Gathering operates on entirely different principles. We've been monitoring your empire for over 100 years, Admiral. We know things about your government that some of your own officials don't know. Commander Karth Null studied the display with growing horror. Admiral, look at Section 7. That shows the location of the Emperor's private retreat. That information is known only to the Imperial Guard. We also know about the rebellion brewing in the Altarian system, Captain Morrison added. The one your government thinks it has contained. We've been in contact with the resistance leaders for several years now. Admiral Zool felt his world shifting beneath his feet. Everything he had believed about Zarathian superiority was crumbling. What do you want? He asked again, his voice much quieter now. We want peace, Admiral, but peace on new terms. The age of galactic empires, built on conquest and slavery, is ending. Humanity is here to make sure of that. Captain Ben Hayes of the Constitution leaned forward on his screen. Admiral, let me show you what happens to empires that refuse to change. The Constitution fired another particle beam, this one much more powerful than the first. It struck a large asteroid floating near the battlefield. The asteroid, which was roughly the size of a city, simply vanished. There was no explosion, no debris field. It was there one moment and gone the next. Complete molecular disintegration, Captain. Hayes explained matter-of-factly. We don't usually need to use that level of power, but it's available when necessary. Admiral Zool stared at the empty space where the asteroid had been. A cold fear settled in his stomach. Weapons that could erase matter itself were beyond anything in the Zarathian arsenal. The Yorktown would like to show you our defensive capabilities, Captain Amy Foster said cheerfully. Don't worry, we won't hurt anyone. The Yorktown launched dozens of small drones that spread out around the battlefield. Each drone projected a shimmering energy field that connected with the others, creating a web of light around both fleets. Quantum barrier network, Captain Foster explained. Nothing can get in or out without our permission. Not ships, not weapons, not even radio signals. We could keep your entire fleet trapped here indefinitely if we wanted to. Captain Ryan Cooper of the Intrepid spoke up next. Admiral, observe your flagship's position carefully. The massive Eternal Dominion began to rotate slowly, despite the fact that its engines were not firing. The ship's crew felt nothing unusual, but outside observers could see the enormous vessel turning like a child's toy. Gravity manipulation. On a macro scale, Captain Cooper said, we can move planets if necessary, Admiral. Moving your ships is quite simple by comparison. Stop, Admiral Zoll said weakly. I understand. You could destroy us all. We could, Captain Morrison agreed. But we don't want to. Destruction is wasteful and unnecessary. We prefer conversion. Conversion? Captain Nina Torres of the Defiance answered him. Conversion from empire to civilization, Admiral. From conquerors to citizens of a peaceful galaxy. The Defiance will now demonstrate our temporal capabilities more fully. Captain Torres continued. Watch your sensor readings carefully. The Defiance vanished again, but this time it stayed gone for several minutes. During that time, the human ship appeared briefly at various locations throughout the star system. It was seen near the system's outer planets, close to the star itself, and at several points between. We stepped outside linear time, Captain Torres explained when the ship finally reappeared in its original position. From our perspective, we spent several hours exploring your entire star system. For you, it was only a few minutes. We could have visited every world in your empire and returned before you finished this conversation. Admiral Zal sat down heavily. In his command chair, his empire's technology seemed primitive compared to what these humans possessed. How? He asked simply. How did we develop such advanced technology? Captain Morrison considered the question. Through cooperation, Admiral. While your empire was busy conquering and enslaving other species, humanity was learning from them. We made friends instead of enemies. We shared knowledge instead of stealing it. We built alliances instead of building prisons. Dr. Martinez pulled up another display. Admiral, let me show you something interesting. This is a list of the species your empire has conquered or enslaved over the past 3 centuries. Names and pictures appeared on the screen. Dozens of different alien races, all showing signs of oppression and suffering under Zarathian rule. Now, let me show you the same species today. Dr. Martinez continued. The display changed to show the same races, but they looked completely different. They were healthy, prosperous, and obviously free. Many were working together on advanced technological projects. Every species your empire has oppressed is now a member of the Galactic Cooperative, Dr. Martinez explained. They've been working with humanity to develop the technologies you've just witnessed. The weapon systems, the defensive grids, the temporal manipulation devices. All of these were created through cooperative research. Impossible, Admiral Zal said, but his voice lacked conviction. Quite possible, Admiral, Captain Morrison replied. When people work together instead of against each other, amazing things happen. Your empire could be part of this cooperation, instead of its enemy. Commander Kurth Null looked at his admiral with pleading eyes. Sir, perhaps we should consider their offer. Our current path leads only to destruction. Admiral Zal was quiet for a long moment, thinking about everything he had seen and heard. His empire, which had seemed so powerful just an hour ago, was revealed to be weak and backward compared to this human-led alliance. What would happen to us? He asked finally. To our people, our worlds, our way of life? Your people would be free to live as they choose, Captain Morrison answered. Your worlds would remain yours, but without the need to exploit others. Your way of life would change, but for the better. Instead of being conquerors, you could be explorers, scientists, artists, whatever you choose to be. And if some of our people refuse to accept these changes? Captain Morrison's expression became serious. Then they'll discover that humanity can be much less pleasant when we're not being diplomatic, Admiral. We've shown you our advanced technology. What we haven't shown you is our capacity for warfare when peaceful solutions fail. Admiral Zoll looked around his bridge at his frightened crew, then at his disabled fleet, then at the 5 human ships that had revealed themselves to be far more. And they appeared. I need to speak with my government, he said finally. Of course, Admiral, Captain Morrison replied. But I should mention that we've already been in contact with several members of your Imperial Council. Some of them are quite interested in our proposals for peaceful cooperation. Admiral Zul's eyes widened. These humans had infiltrated even the highest levels of his government. How long have you been planning this? He asked. Captain Morrison smiled. Admiral, humanity doesn't just plan for first contact. We plan for what comes after first contact, and what comes after that, And what comes after that? We think ahead. Very far ahead, added Captain Torres with a grin. For the first time in his life, Admiral Vextar Zol began to understand that his empire was not the most powerful force in the galaxy. Not anymore. Admiral Vextar Zul stood on his bridge, looking out at the 5 human ships that had changed everything. His proud fleet was scattered and disabled. His empire's secrets had been laid bare. His entire understanding of galactic power had been shattered in less than 2 hours. Admiral, Commander Kurth Null said quietly, "We're receiving a priority transmission from the Imperial capital." "Put it through," Admiral Zal said wearily. The image that appeared on his screen shocked him. High Counselor Rexani Var, second. Only to the Emperor himself, looked tired and worried. Behind him, Admiral Zal could see other council members arguing in the background. "Admiral Zal," the High Counselor said, "we have been contacted by human representatives. They claim to have demonstrated their capabilities to your fleet. Is this true?" Admiral Zul looked at his disabled ships floating helplessly in space. "It is true, High Counselor. Their technology is far beyond anything we possess. They have weapons that can disable our ships without damaging them, defenses that can stop our most powerful attacks, and intelligence networks that know more about our empire than we do." High Counselor Rexani was quiet for a moment. "The humans have offered us terms for peaceful coexistence. The Council is divided on how to respond." "What are the terms?" Admiral Zal asked. "Complete cessation of all conquest activities. Freedom for all enslaved populations. Transformation of our military from a conquest force to a defensive one. In exchange, they offer membership in something called the Galactic Cooperative and access to their advanced technologies." Admiral Zal considered this. "High Counselor, I recommend acceptance. We cannot defeat these humans in battle. Their capabilities are simply too advanced. Some council members believe we should fight," the High Counselor said. "They think humanity is bluffing about their true strength." Captain Morrison's voice cut into the conversation. "High Counselor, if I may interrupt? This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human fleet. We are not bluffing about anything." The High Counselor looked startled. "How are you intercepting our secure communications?" "The same way we've been monitoring your empire for over a century," Captain Morrison replied calmly. "Your communication security is not as secure as you believe it to be." Dr. Helen Martinez appeared on the screen next to Captain Morrison. "High Counselor, we understand that this is a difficult decision for your government. Change is never easy, especially for a civilization that has been successful using old methods. But the galaxy is evolving, and your empire must evolve with it or be left behind. What guarantee do we have that you won't simply conquer us once we've dismantled our military?" The High Counselor asked. Captain Ben Hayes answered from the Constitution. "High Counselor, if we wanted to conquer your empire, we could have done it already. We've had detailed intelligence on all your worlds and defenses for decades. Conquest was never our goal." "Then what is your goal?" Admiral Zul asked. Captain Amy Foster smiled from the Yorktown. "Peace, Admiral. Real peace, not the temporary quiet that comes from fear and oppression. We want a galaxy where different species can work together, learn from each other, and explore the universe as friends instead of enemies." High Counselor Rexani looked thoughtful. "And you believe this is possible?" Captain Ryan Cooper of the Intrepid nodded. "It's not just possible, High Counselor. It's already happening. 47 different species are already members of the Galactic Cooperative. They've been working together for over 50 years to build a better future." 47 species? Admiral Zal was amazed. "We knew of only 12 intelligent races in this region of space." Captain Nina Torres laughed from the Defiance. "Admiral, there are over 200 intelligent species in just this galaxy alone. Your empire has been operating in a very small part of a very large universe. The implications of this statement hit Admiral Zal like a physical blow. The Jarathian Empire, which he had thought controlled a significant portion of the galaxy, was actually just a minor power in a tiny corner of space. We have been limited in our perspective, Admiral Zal admitted quietly. That's not unusual, Captain Morrison said kindly. Most species go through a phase where they think they're the most important civilization in the universe. It's a natural part of development. The question is whether you're ready to grow beyond that phase. High Counselor Rexani was quiet for several minutes, clearly thinking deeply about the situation. Finally, he spoke. What would be the first step if we decided to accept your terms? Dr. Martinez pulled up a document on her screen. We've prepared something we call the Kepler Accords, named after this star system where we're meeting. It's a framework for your empire's transition from conquest to cooperation. The first step would be an immediate ceasefire on all military operations, Captain Morrison explained. No more attacks on other worlds. No more expansion activities. No more enslavement of prisoners. The second step would be the beginning of freedom processes for all enslaved populations, Dr. Martinez continued. We understand this will take time and careful planning. We're prepared to help with the logistics. The third step would be the establishment of diplomatic relations between your empire and the Galactic Cooperative, Captain Foster added. Cultural exchange, trade agreements, joint research projects. Admiral Zal found himself nodding as he listened. After seeing what humanity was capable of, the idea of joining their alliance seemed much more attractive than fighting them. High Counselor, he said, I strongly recommend that we accept these terms. Fighting humanity would be suicide for our empire. Even if we gathered all our fleets from across all three systems? The High Counselor asked. Captain Torres answered that question. High Counselor, the 5 ships you see here represent a tiny fraction of the Cooperative's defensive capabilities. If you gathered every ship in your empire, you would still be vastly outnumbered and outgunned. But more importantly, Captain, Morrison added, you would be fighting alone. Every species your empire has oppressed would be fighting against you alongside humanity. Every enemy you've made would see this as their chance for revenge. Commander Kurth Null leaned close to Admiral Zal and whispered, Sir, we have made many enemies over the centuries. A war against humanity would bring all of them down on us at once. Admiral Zal nodded grimly. High Counselor, the military situation is hopeless. We must seek peace. High Counselor Rexani was quiet for another long moment. Then he straightened his shoulders and made his decision. Admiral Zal, you are authorized to begin negotiations with the human representatives. The Imperial Council accepts the principle of peaceful coexistence. Captain Morrison smiled warmly. High Counselor, Admiral, that's wonderful news. Dr. Martinez will work with your representatives to draft the specific terms of the accords. One question, Captain, Admiral Zal said. Why did you reveal your true capabilities to us? You could have continued the deception and gathered even more intelligence. Captain Morrison considered the question carefully. Because, Admiral, true peace cannot be built on deception. For our alliance to work, it has to be based on honesty and mutual respect. We wanted you to understand exactly what humanity is capable of, so you could make an informed decision about our future relationship. And, Captain Torres added with a grin, because it was fun to see the look on your face when we dropped the disguise. Despite everything, Admiral Zal found himself chuckling. These humans had a sense of humor, even in the middle of diplomatic negotiations. Over the next several hours, Dr. Martinez worked with Zarathian representatives to draft the Kepler Accords. The document outlined a gradual transition process that would transform the empire from a military dictatorship to a member of the Galactic community. As the negotiations concluded, Admiral Zoll found himself curious about something. Captain Morrison, you said this demonstration represents your most basic defensive systems. What are your more advanced capabilities like? Captain Morrison's smile became slightly mysterious. Admiral, let's just say that what you've seen today is what we show to species we want to become friends with. What we keep hidden is reserved for species that refuse to be reasonable. The galaxy is a big place, Captain Hayes added, and humanity has had a long time to prepare for all the different kinds of neighbors we might encounter. Admiral Zoll nodded thoughtfully. He was beginning to understand that humanity was far more than they appeared to be. These 5 ships had effortlessly defeated his entire fleet, but they were just the tip of a very large iceberg. Admiral, Captain Morrison said as the negotiations drew to a close, there's one more thing I want you to understand. This isn't the end of Zarathian greatness. It's the beginning of a new kind of greatness. Your people have the opportunity to become explorers, scientists, artists, builders. Instead of being remembered as conquerors, you can be remembered as creators. The universe is vast and full of wonders, Dr. Martinez added. Working together, our species can discover things that neither of us could find alone. As the Zarathian fleet began the process of repair and reorganization under the new accords, Admiral Zoll stood on his bridge and looked out at the 5 human ships. They no longer seemed threatening. Instead, they looked like what they really were, the beginning of a new era. Commander Kurth, he said to his second-in-command, prepare a message to all Zarathian fleets.
The quiet of deep space was broken by a series of urgent beeps on the main deck of the Galactic Coalition patrol ship, Vigilance. Captain Reed, a tall blue-skinned being with 4 eyes that could see across multiple light spectrums, jerked his head up from the report he was reading. Report, he ordered, his voice calm despite the warning lights now flashing across his control panel. Officer Tem, seated at the scanner station, spoke quickly. Unknown vessel detected at the edge of Sector 7, Captain. It's giving off very strange readings. Reed moved to stand behind Tem, looking at the screen with growing concern. The readings were indeed unusual. Heat signatures far beyond normal levels for a functioning ship. Particulate matter trailing behind the vessel. Chemical compositions that matched no known friendly species technology. Is it under attack? Reed asked, his secondary eyes narrowing to focus on the details. No weapon signatures detected, Tem replied, her 4 hands moving rapidly over the controls. But these emissions, I've never seen anything like this. The ship appears to be burning from the inside. Reed's skin paled to a lighter blue. In the 300 years of Galactic Coalition space travel, fire aboard ships had become nearly unheard of. Modern materials simply didn't burn. Fire suppression technology had advanced to the point where even the idea of flames on a starship was the stuff of horror stories told to scare young cadets. Send emergency alert to Coalition headquarters, Reed commanded. Unknown vessel in distress, possible catastrophic system failure with internal combustion. Request immediate assistance. Within minutes, the response came back. 3 additional Coalition ships were being diverted to their location. Emergency medical teams were being assembled. Fire suppression units were being prepped. The ship is maintaining a steady course, Tem reported with surprise. If they're experiencing a fire of this magnitude, their navigation system should be compromised. Reed studied the trajectory. They're heading directly toward Coalition space. Maybe they're making a desperate run for help. The ship's communication officer, Marn, suddenly straightened in his seat. Captain, the unknown vessel is transmitting. Put it through, Reed ordered, bracing himself for distress calls or fragmented emergency messages. Instead, a calm, clear voice came through the speakers. Coalition patrol vessel, this is Captain Miller of the Earth ship Prometheus. We notice you've been tracking us for the past 20 minutes. Is there a problem? The bridge crew of the Vigilance exchanged confused looks. The voice sounded completely untroubled. This is Captain Reed of the Coalition patrol ship, Vigilance. We've detected serious anomalies aboard your vessel. Are you aware your ship is showing signs of internal combustion? There was a pause, then what sounded strangely like laughter. Oh, that. Yes. Everything's fine, Captain Reed. We're just preparing the evening meal. First night of our journey, so we're having a bit of a celebration. Reed blinked all four eyes in succession, a sign of extreme confusion among his species. Preparing meal? With fire? He asked, his translator possibly malfunctioning. Yes, we've got the grill going in, the mess hall. Chef's special tonight. Actual flame-broiled burgers, not those synthesized things. We also have a few science experiments running that require controlled combustion. Standard procedure. The bridge of the Vigilance fell silent. Reed looked at his science officer Dale, who appeared just as baffled. Your species deliberately creates fire inside your vessels? Dale asked, unable to keep the horror from his voice. Well, sure, Captain Miller replied casually. Humans have been cooking with fire for about 1,000,000 years. Hard habit to break. Our ships are designed for it. By this time, the 3 emergency response vessels had arrived, surrounding the human ship in standard rescue formation. The lead, rescue ship Mercy, was already deploying boarding shuttles filled with fire suppression teams in full hazard gear. Reed quickly opened a channel to all ships. Hold your positions. This may be a first contact situation with unknown protocols. Back to the human captain, Reed spoke carefully. Captain Miller, our sensors indicate temperatures in several sections of your ship that would be fatal to most coalition species. Are you certain your crew is safe? There was that strange sound again, laughter. Quite safe, Captain Reed. Humans are very heat tolerant, and the cooking areas are well ventilated. Would you like to come aboard and see for yourself? We have plenty of food to share. Reed hesitated. Coalition protocol demanded investigation of any potential hazard near their borders, but boarding a ship with active fires went against every safety regulation in the book. I accept your invitation, Reed finally said, but I must bring safety officers and medical personnel. Bring whoever you like, Miller replied cheerfully. Docking Bay 3 is open for you. 30 minutes later, Reed led a team of 10 coalition officers, all wearing full environmental protection suits, through the airlock of the human ship. They were met by Captain Miller, a surprisingly small being with light brown skin and only 2 eyes, wearing nothing more protective than what she called a uniform. Welcome aboard the Prometheus, Miller said, with a gesture Reed's translator identified as friendly. Sorry for the confusion. We weren't informed that open flames would cause such alarm. All flames cause alarm in space, Reed said stiffly. Fire consumes oxygen and produces toxic gases. It damages systems and kills crew. Miller nodded. For us, controlled fire is a tool. Let me show you. She led the nervous coalition team through corridors that seemed remarkably normal, despite the alarming readings on their environmental sensors. When they reached what Miller called the galley, Reed almost ordered an immediate evacuation. In an open area, visible behind safety glass, a human was standing before a metal surface that glowed with actual flames. The human was turning pieces of what appeared to be organic matter directly over these flames. Nearby, another human was manipulating a device that heated water to the point of visible steam. That's our chef Tom grilling the burgers I mentioned, Miller explained casually. And over there is our coffee station, essential for human functioning, especially during early shift. Dale, the science officer, was frantically taking readings. Captain Reed, he whispered, these humans are deliberately exposing protein-rich organic material to temperatures that cause chemical changes, and then they appear to be planning to consume it. You mean they're going to eat things they put in fire? Reed asked, his voice faint. Miller grinned. We call it cooking, and we've been doing it since before we had spaceflight. Would you like to try some? Tom makes the best burgers in the fleet. Reed looked at the flames, then at the calm humans moving around them as if standing next to certain death was completely normal. In that moment, he realized this first contact was going to be far more complicated than anyone in the coalition could have imagined. I think, Reed said slowly, we need to talk about your species' relationship with fire. Captain Reed and his team stood frozen in the doorway of the human ship's galley. The sight of open flames aboard a spacecraft went against everything they had been taught since their earliest training days. Perhaps we should continue this conversation elsewhere, Reed suggested, his voice tight with stress. Somewhere without active burning. Captain Miller looked puzzled but nodded. Of course. The conference room is just down the hall, but the burgers will be ready in about 10 minutes, if you'd like to stay. As they walked, Reed noticed his science officer Dale was still taking readings with a handheld scanner, his eyes wide with fascination and horror. Captain, Dale whispered, their environmental systems are filtering the combustion byproducts at an impressive rate, and the fire is contained within designated areas with multiple safety systems. Reed glanced back toward the galley. You mean they've engineered their ships to accommodate fire? Deliberately? It appears so, Dale said. Fascinating and terrifying at the same time. The conference room was mercifully free of flames. The coalition officers sat stiffly in their protective suits while Captain Miller and her first officer, a tall man named Adams, sat comfortably across from them. I understand this must be quite a shock, Miller said, leaning forward with her elbows on the table. Our briefings mentioned that coalition species had moved away from combustion technology, but we didn't realize it would cause such alarm. Moved? Away? Reed's translator struggled to convey his tone of disbelief. Open flame has been banned on all coalition vessels for over 200 years. It's considered as dangerous as a hull breach. Adams, the first officer, looked surprised. Really? No cooking with fire? No candles? No fireplaces in the recreation areas? Fire... places? Dale repeated the unfamiliar term, his scanner nearly dropping from his hand. You create dedicated locations for fire? Miller smiled. On Earth, our home planet, many homes still have fireplaces. They're mostly for comfort and tradition now, but they were essential for thousands of years. Humans gathered around fires for warmth, protection, and community. Reed's skin shifted to a pale blue, indicating deep confusion. Your species evolved with fire. We did more than evolve with it, Adams explained. We mastered it. Some scientists believe controlling fire is what made humans, well, human. It changed how we ate, how we socialized, even how our brains developed. At that moment, the door slid open and a human crew member entered carrying a tray. On it were several flat, round objects that emitted a strong aroma. The coalition officers tensed, their protective suits automatically sealing completely closed. I thought you might be hungry, Captain Miller said. These are the burgers I mentioned. Beef patties cooked over an open flame, served on bread with various toppings. Reed stared at the food with equal parts curiosity and horror. And you? Eat this food that has been deliberately exposed to fire? It tastes better that way, the crew member said simply, setting down the tray. The flame creates flavors you can't get from a food synthesizer. Dale had directed his scanner toward the food. Captain Reed, the chemical composition of these items has been significantly altered by the heating process. New compounds have formed that weren't in the original materials. That's the point, Miller said. We call it the Maillard reaction. It creates hundreds of new flavor compounds. It's why grilled food tastes different from boiled food. The word different hardly seemed adequate to Reed. His species, like most in the coalition, had been eating synthesized or minimally processed foods for generations. The idea of deliberately causing chemical reactions in food through extreme heat was primitive, dangerous, and yet these humans seemed not just comfortable with it but enthusiastic. There are other uses of controlled fire on your vessel? Reed asked cautiously. Miller nodded. Several of our science labs use combustion in experiments. Our ceremonial area has candles for various human traditions. And of course there's the coffee machines, tea kettles, and other heating elements in personal quarters. Reed's 4 eyes blinked in sequence again. You allow individual crew members to create fire in their private spaces? With proper safety protocols, yes, Adams said. Most quarters have small heating elements for beverages. Some crew members even have permission to burn incense for religious or meditation purposes. Dale was frantically taking notes. Captain Reed, this suggests a fundamental difference in how humans interact with their environment. They don't just tolerate fire, they incorporate it into daily life, science, and even spiritual practices. One of the medical officers who had remained silent until now spoke up. How do you prevent casualties? Fire consumes oxygen, creates toxic gases, and damages tissue on contact. Captain Miller's expression grew more serious. We take fire safety very seriously. Every human child is taught about fire safety from a young age. Our ships have extensive suppression systems, compartmentalization, and sensors far more sensitive than most vessels. Fire is a tool we respect, not something we fear. Reed considered this. The concept was so alien to him that he struggled to find the right questions to ask. In coalition training, fire was presented as an unmitigated disaster, something to be prevented at all costs. But these humans spoke of it almost as a companion species. I would like to observe your fire safety protocols, Reed finally said, and document how you coexist with this element. Captain Miller smiled. Of course, we'd be happy to show you. In fact, if you're comfortable with it, we're planning a small celebration tonight. One of our crew members has a birthday, and human tradition includes small controlled flames on a sweet food item we call cake. The coalition officers exchanged alarmed glances, their protective suits whirring softly as environmental controls adjusted to their stress levels. You deliberately set food on fire for celebration purposes? Reed asked. Just small candles, Adams explained. The birthday person makes a wish and blows them out. It's harmless. The medical officer's voice was faint. You encourage blowing air onto flames, wouldn't that spread the fire? That's the point, Miller said with a laugh. To extinguish them. Reed sat back in his chair, feeling overwhelmed. What had begun as an emergency response to a potential disaster had become a first contact scenario unlike any in coalition records. These humans didn't just tolerate danger, they celebrated it, cooked with it, even blew air at it for fun. I believe, Reed said slowly, that we need to update our species' interaction protocols. Humans appear to have a unique relationship with elements that other species consider hazardous. Miller nodded, looking pleased. We've found that's often the case when we meet new species. What's dangerous to one can be essential to another. Would you like to try a burger? Your suit should be able to analyze it for compatibility with your biology. Reed looked at the strange food, browned by actual fire, sitting innocently on the table. It represented everything the coalition had moved beyond centuries ago. And yet, these humans had built starships advanced enough to reach coalition space, while still cooking their food over flames. Perhaps, Reed said carefully, there are some old ways that still have value. He reached for the burger, initiating his suit's external object handling protocol, and wondered what other surprises these flame-loving humans might have in store. Word traveled fast in coalition space. By the time the human ship Prometheus was escorted to Orbital Station 7, the largest coalition outpost in the sector, nearly every official had heard about the fire-using aliens. The docking procedures took 3 times longer than normal. Station safety officers insisted on special containment fields and emergency teams standing by. Captain Miller and her crew found the extra precautions amusing, but cooperated fully. Are they always this nervous? Adams asked as they waited in the airlock. Miller shrugged. Remember how the Martian colonists reacted when we first showed them actual soil gardening? Some species just get set in their ways. When the airlock finally opened, they were greeted by a delegation of high-ranking coalition officials. At the front stood Station Director Brill, a tall, thin being with silvery skin that reflected the station lights. Welcome to Orbital Station 7, Director Brill said formally. We have prepared special quarters for your stay that should accommodate your unusual requirements. Captain Miller smiled politely. Thank you, Director. We're looking forward to establishing good relations with the coalition. Yes, well, Brill said, looking uncomfortable. There are certain matters we must discuss first. If you would follow me to the conference room. The conference room was large, with a long table surrounded by representatives from various coalition species. Captain Miller, Adams, and Human Ambassador Jones took seats on one side. Director Brill and the station's security chief, Naven, sat directly across from them. "Let me be direct," Brill began. "Your cooking and heating practices present a significant safety concern for our station and all coalition vessels." Ambassador Jones nodded. "Captain Reed informed us of your concerns. We understand that coalition species have moved away from using open flame technology." "Moved away?" Security Chief Naven's voice was sharp. "We eliminated it completely. It's a Level 1 prohibited technology, alongside biological weapons and unshielded radiation sources." The humans exchanged surprised glances. "That seems extreme," Ambassador Jones said carefully. "Fire is a basic tool for humanity. We've been using controlled flames for cooking, heating, and cultural practices for our entire history." A science officer at the far end of the table spoke up. "Our records indicate your species only achieved spaceflight in the last few centuries. Yet you've maintained these primitive combustion practices." Miller tried to hide her annoyance at the word primitive. "We've refined and improved our relationship with fire, not abandoned it. Our ships have the most advanced fire safety systems in our fleet's history." Director Brill slid a data tablet across the table. "These are coalition safety regulations regarding prohibited technologies. Section 37.2 clearly states that no open flame is permitted on any vessel or station under any circumstances." Ambassador Jones picked up the tablet and scanned it quickly. "I see. However, as non-members of the coalition, we operate under our own safety protocols, and those protocols have proven extremely effective." "Not the point," Security Chief Naven said firmly. "While in coalition space, all vessels must comply with coalition safety standards." A tense silence fell over the room. The humans had traveled a great distance to establish diplomatic relations with the coalition, but giving up cooking with fire would be asking them to abandon a fundamental part of their culture. "Perhaps a compromise," Ambassador Jones suggested. "What if we restrict cooking and other flame activities to our ship only? When visiting your stations or vessels, we'll respect your regulations." Director Brill's silvery skin rippled with what seemed to be frustration. "That still leaves your vessel as a potential hazard in our space." "A hazard?" Captain Miller couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "Our ship has traveled through 3 star systems without incident. We've had exactly 0 fire-related emergencies in the 5 years since Prometheus was launched." "That's not the point," another coalition official said. "The mere presence of intentional combustion within our jurisdiction creates unacceptable risk." Ambassador Jones leaned forward. "With respect, what exactly are you asking? That we shut down our kitchens, our science labs? That we change our entire way of life to visit your space?" "Yes," Director Brill said simply. "That would be the safest option." The human delegation was stunned into silence. It was one thing to be told their practices were unusual, quite another to be asked to abandon them completely. Captain Miller stood up slowly. "Perhaps we should take some time to consider our options. This is clearly a more significant cultural difference than we anticipated." As the humans left the conference room, the coalition officials remained, talking in low voices about the dangerous aliens and their bizarre attachment to creating fire in enclosed spaces. Back on the Prometheus, the human crew gathered in the mess hall, ironically around the very grills and cooking stations that had caused the problem. "They're seriously expecting us to give up cooking?" Chef Tom asked, flipping a steak on the grill. The sizzling sound and rich aroma filled the room. "That's not happening." Ambassador Jones sighed. "We need to find some middle ground. The coalition represents 17 spacefaring species and controls most of the trading routes in this sector. We can't just write them off." Adams was reviewing the safety regulations on a tablet. "Their fear of fire goes beyond reasonable caution. It's almost religious, like they see fire as some kind of evil force." "That might not be far off, Miller." Dale, the science officer from the Vigilance, told me that several coalition species evolved on planets with naturally occurring fire hazards, forest fires, volcanic activity, that sort of thing. They never learned to control fire because they were too busy running from it. Ambassador Jones considered this. So while humans were sitting around campfires telling stories, their ancestors were fleeing from flames in terror. No wonder they don't understand our relationship with it. So what do we do? Adams asked. Shut down our kitchens and eat their synthesized food while we're here? No, Miller said firmly. We find a way to show them that controlled fire isn't just safe, it's valuable. We need to change their perspective. The discussion was interrupted by a sudden blaring alarm. Red emergency lights began flashing throughout the ship. What now? Miller muttered, moving to the comm panel on the wall. Bridge report. The voice of the duty officer came through, sounding concerned. Captain, we're receiving an emergency broadcast from the station. They're experiencing some kind of major systems failure. Power outages across multiple sections. Miller looked back at her officers, a grim smile forming on her face. Well, Ambassador, you wanted to demonstrate human value to the coalition. I think we just got our chance. What are you thinking, Captain? Jones asked. I'm thinking, Miller replied, that a station without power might appreciate some people who know how to create light and heat the old-fashioned way. As they rushed to gather emergency supplies, Chef Tom carefully shut down his grill, not knowing that the cooking fire he was extinguishing would soon make humans the most valuable allies in the darkened station. Darkness fell over Orbital Station 7 like a heavy blanket. Emergency lights flickered weakly for a few seconds, then died completely. The temperature began to drop almost immediately as the environmental systems failed. Inside the station's control center, Director Brill and his staff moved in confused panic. Their species had excellent night vision, but the complete absence of light still triggered deep instinctual fears. Status report, Brill demanded, his voice higher than normal. Primary and secondary power systems have failed, someone reported from the darkness. Backup systems are not responding. Environmental controls are offline. Estimated temperature dropped to dangerous levels within 2 hours. How is this possible? Brill asked. Triple redundant systems don't just fail simultaneously. Security Chief. Haven's voice came from near the door. We're getting reports of panic in the residential sections. Many species are not handling the darkness well. This was an understatement. Several coalition species had evolved on planets with constant daylight or lived in shallow waters where darkness never reached. Complete darkness triggered profound terror in their brains. We need to restore power immediately, Brill ordered. Contact all engineering teams. Communications are down, came the reply. Internal comms are operating on emergency batteries only, and those will fail within the hour. The situation was rapidly becoming a disaster. Without power, the station would become uninhabitable. Without light, many species would be paralyzed by fear. Without heat, cold-sensitive species would begin to die. A voice spoke from the doorway. Director Brill, this is Captain Miller of the Prometheus. We'd like to help. Brill turned toward the sound. Captain, how did you find the control center in this darkness? Humans evolved as a species that was active during both day and night, Miller explained, stepping into the room. We're comfortable in darkness when necessary, and we brought these. Suddenly, a warm glow filled the room. The humans had brought handheld lights, not the cold blue emergency lights of coalition technology, but warm yellow flames enclosed in glass containers. Are those fires? Navin asked, his voice a mix of horror and fascination. Lanterns, Miller corrected. Controlled flames in contained environments. Been using them for thousands of years during power outages on Earth. The coalition officials stared at the gentle flames. The dancing light cast soft shadows around the room, but instead of making things more frightening, it somehow made the darkness less absolute, less terrifying. We've brought similar lighting to other key areas of the station, Ambassador Jones explained, stepping forward, and we're setting up temporary heating centers in the main gathering spaces. Heating centers? Brill repeated. Portable heating devices, Miller said. Some electric running on our ship's batteries, others using safe combustion methods. We can keep critical areas warm enough for survival until power is restored. Brill and Navin exchanged glances, visible now in the warm light from the human lanterns. You were prepared for this kind of emergency? Navin asked suspiciously. Adams shook his head. Not specifically, but humans have dealt with power outages throughout our history. We maintain certain traditional technologies as backups. Captain Reed from the Vigilance thought our fire practices were primitive, but sometimes the simple solutions are the most reliable. Brill seemed to struggle with the idea. His entire career had been built around following coalition safety protocols, and yet here were these humans, bringing the very thing he feared, fire, into his station, and it was providing light and comfort rather than destruction. Very well, he said finally. What do you need from us? We need your people to stay calm, Miller said, and we need to know which areas of the station house species most vulnerable to cold. With the immediate crisis of darkness addressed, the humans set to work. Crews from the Prometheus moved through the station, setting up simple heating stations in key locations. They used portable cooking stoves, chemical heat packs, and even small controlled fire pits in areas with proper ventilation. In the main medical bay, Dr. West from the Prometheus worked alongside Coalition Medical Officer Bennett to identify species with the greatest vulnerability to cold. These flame heat sources, Bennett said, watching humans set up a heating station, they're so basic, yet effective. Humans have been huddling around fires for warmth since before we built cities, West explained. There's something deeply comforting about it that goes beyond the physical heat. In the central gathering hall, Chef Tom had set up several cooking stations. The warm glow of controlled flames drew frightened station residents like moths to light. Many coalition species, who had never seen fire except in emergency training videos, now found themselves drawn to its warmth and light. What is that smell? Asked a young coalition member, their forearms wrapped tightly around themselves. Hot chocolate, Tom answered, stirring a pot over a portable stove. An earth comfort drink, warm, sweet, and surprisingly effective at improving morale during emergencies. As the hot drinks were passed around, the tension in the room visibly decreased. Species that had been taught to fear fire their entire lives were now sitting near it, accepting its warmth, even finding comfort in its presence. In the engineering section, Adams worked with station engineers to diagnose the power failure. The humans' comfort with working by lantern light proved invaluable, as coalition engineers struggled in the unfamiliar conditions. Your people seem very calm during this crisis, one engineer commented. Adams shrugged. Power outages happen. Humans are good at adapting to temporary setbacks, and we're also good at finding comfort in difficult situations. That's part of why we kept using fire even after we had cleaner technologies. There's something about a flame that speaks to something deep in the human spirit. 6 hours into the crisis, with the station's temperature stabilized by human heating methods and the panic eased by the warm light, a team of engineers finally identified the source of the power failure, a cascading system error triggered by an unexpected solar flare. In the control center, Director Brill had been watching the humans work with growing fascination. These beings who deliberately created fire on their ships had turned what the Coalition considered a deadly threat into a life-saving resource. Your methods are unorthodox, Brill admitted to Captain Miller as they reviewed the station's status, but I cannot deny their effectiveness in this situation. Miller smiled. Sometimes the oldest solutions are the most reliable. Humanity never abandoned fire because we learned to see it as a tool, not just a danger. As the emergency lights finally flickered back to life, powered by jury-rigged systems, Brill looked around at the lanterns the humans had brought. Their warm glow now seemed almost friendly compared to the harsh blue emergency lighting. Perhaps, Brill said slowly, there are some old ways that deserve reconsideration. Miller nodded. Fire can be dangerous, yes, but so can any powerful tool. The key isn't to ban it, but to respect it and learn to use it properly. As power gradually returned to the station, section by section, many coalition members found themselves strangely reluctant to see the human lanterns extinguished and the heating stations dismantled. Something about the dancing flames had awakened old, forgotten instincts. Memories of ancestors who had once, long ago, gathered around fires for warmth and protection before technology had made such practices unnecessary. And perhaps some began To wonder unnecessary didn't always mean without value. 2 days after the power crisis, Orbital Station 7 had returned to normal operations. The Coalition engineering teams had restored all systems, repaired the damage from the solar flare, and added new safeguards to prevent similar failures in the future. But something had changed on the station. The atmosphere was different. The way Coalition members looked at the human visitors had shifted. In the main conference room, the Coalition Council had reconvened. This time, however, the meeting had none of the tension of their previous encounter. Director Brill sat at the head of the table, with Captain Miller and Ambassador Jones to his right. The Council has reviewed the events of the recent emergency, Brill began formally, and we wish to express our official gratitude to the crew of the Prometheus for their assistance during the crisis. Miller nodded politely. We were happy to help, Director. More than help, another council member added. Your quick action and unconventional methods saved lives, particularly among our cold-sensitive species. Ambassador Jones smiled. Humans have a long history of adapting to emergencies. Fire has been one of our most valuable tools in that regard. Brill cleared his throat. Yes, about that. The council has been discussing your fire practices. We have reviewed our safety regulations regarding open flame aboard vessels and stations. The humans waited, expecting another lecture about safety protocols. We would like to learn more, Brill continued, surprising them. About how humans safely manage fire in space environments. Captain Miller blinked in surprise. You want us to teach you about fire safety? Not just safety, Brill said, but also applications. Many species reported finding the warmth and light from your heating methods more comforting than our standard emergency systems. Security Chief Navin added, several medical officers noted reduced stress levels among patients who were near your lanterns during the crisis. There appears to be some psychological benefit we had not considered. This was a remarkable shift. Just days ago, these same officials had been horrified by the very idea of fire aboard their station. Now they were talking about psychological benefits. We would be happy to demonstrate our methods, Miller said. Perhaps we could start with something simple like our cooking techniques. Yes, Brill agreed. A practical demonstration would be most informative. And so began what the humans would later call the Great Coalition Cookout. Chef Tom and his team set up cooking stations in one of the station's largest gathering spaces. With proper ventilation established and safety measures in place, they began to demonstrate human cooking techniques to fascinated Coalition observers. The key to fire safety, Tom explained to a group of Coalition engineers, isn't eliminating fire completely. It's understanding how it works, respecting its power, and containing it properly. He showed them how human cooking stations were designed with multiple redundant safety features, how fire suppression systems worked, how humans had learned to control flames rather than fear them. But the real breakthrough came when Coalition members began to taste the food. This is extraordinary, a Coalition scientist said after trying a grilled vegetable that was compatible with their biology. The flavors are completely different from synthesized food. That's the Maillard reaction I mentioned earlier, Adams explained. The chemical changes that occur during cooking create flavor compounds that can't be perfectly replicated by food synthesizers. Throughout the day, more Coalition members gathered to watch the demonstrations. Medical Officer Bennett had set up a station to monitor physiological responses to the cooked food among different species. Fascinating, Bennett reported to Captain Miller. Many species are showing positive neurological responses to both the aroma and flavor of fire-cooked foods, similar to responses we see with comfort stimuli. Miller smiled. Humans have known that for thousands of years. There's something primal about food cooked over flame that connects to something deep inside us. By evening, Captain Reed from the Vigilance had arrived at the station. He approached Miller with what his species considered a smile. It seems your dangerous habits have found some admirers, Reed said, gesturing to where several Coalition officials were cautiously attempting to cook under Tom's supervision. Not dangerous when properly respected, Miller replied. Just different from what you're used to. Reed nodded. I've been reviewing historical data. Most coalition species abandoned fire use very early in their technological development. We never went through the thousands of years humans spent mastering it. Different evolutionary paths, Miller agreed. You developed other technologies instead. Yes, but perhaps we lost something in the process, Reed admitted. The crisis showed that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most reliable. 1 week later, the council reconvened for a formal announcement. Director Brill stood at the podium looking both serious and slightly uncomfortable. After careful consideration and extensive safety reviews, Brill announced, the Coalition Council has approved a new exception to our safety regulations. Under the classification of human cultural practices, controlled fire use will be permitted in designated areas of coalition space, subject to strict safety protocols and training requirements. A murmur ran through the crowd. This was unprecedented, the first exception ever granted to the fire prohibition in 200 years of coalition history. Furthermore, Brill continued, we are announcing the establishment of a cultural exchange program between humans and coalition species. The first course offerings will include Introduction to Cooking with Fire and Emergency Survival Techniques. Captain Miller and Ambassador Jones exchanged pleased glances. This was far more than they had hoped for when they first entered coalition space. 6 months later, the Prometheus returned to Orbital Station 7 after completing a diplomatic tour of several coalition worlds. As they docked, Miller couldn't help but notice the changes. The station now featured a large, specially designed Earth Cultural Center with proper ventilation and safety systems. Inside, several cooking stations were in use, with coalition members working alongside human instructors. Captain Reed met them at the airlock, his skin a cheerful bright blue. Welcome back, Captain Miller, he said. Thank you, Captain Reed, Miller replied. I see things have changed since our last visit. Reed made a gesture of agreement. Indeed, I've been taking the cooking classes myself. I've found I have something of a talent for it. Really? Miller raised an eyebrow in surprise. Yes, Reed said with pride. I've become particularly skilled at what you call grilling. There's something satisfying about mastering the control of flame. As they walked through the station, Miller noticed other changes too. Many personal quarters now featured small heating elements for beverages. Some gathering spaces had contained fire features that reminded her of the fireplaces humans had used for centuries. In the main dining hall, they found Chef Tom working alongside a coalition chef. They were teaching a class on combining human cooking techniques with coalition ingredients. Our star student, Tom said, gesturing to a familiar face. It was the formerly terrified coalition officer who had first boarded the Prometheus expecting to find a ship in catastrophic failure. Now he was carefully turning pieces of food over, an open flame, his 4 eyes focused with concentration instead of fear. It's a matter of perspective, Reed explained as they watched. What was once seen as a primitive danger is now understood as a valuable cultural practice with practical applications. Miller smiled. Fire has always been that way for humans. Dangerous when feared, valuable when respected. As they joined the cooking class, Miller reflected on how far they had come. What had begun as an emergency response to a supposed disaster had become a bridge between cultures. The humans had brought more than just their technology to the coalition. They had brought an ancient relationship with a fundamental force of nature, one that many species had abandoned too quickly in their rush toward technological advancement. Sometimes, Miller thought as she watched coalition members and humans cooking side by side, the oldest traditions have the most to teach us about being alive in the universe. And sometimes what looks like a fire on a starship is just humans being human.